Human Skull Anatomy Part 2. Okay, so I went ahead and drew all over the skull to make the sutures clear, to have some color contrast there. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it so that we get the posterior view. This is the occipital bone, and we're going to flip it over like so. And this humongous hole right here is called the foramen magnum, and it literally means hole that is large. Foramen means a hole, magnum, large. And these two protrusions are called the occipital condyles. These two things that are sticking out, they're occipital condyles. And remember, we've already identified these two tiny protrusions. This is the mastoid process, the styloid process, and we have our ear hole right here, external auditory meatus. Okay, and this is the mandible. We're just looking at the underside of the skull. You see that? The mandible right here. So what we're looking over here, maybe I should flip it this way. Okay, let's flip it this way. See that? I drew a line here to show this whole area here is the hard palate, which is divided into two parts. This is the maxilla, the maxilla here. That's just the underside of the maxilla. And this is the palatine bone. And on the maxilla, there's a line that is drawn straight down. This line is a suture that divides the right and the left hard palates. And this is called the medial palatine suture that is right along the center of the hard palate in the maxilla region. And I drew a little round circle here right behind the central incisors. This is the let me turn it this way. So this round thing is the incisive fossa, right behind the central incisors. Okay, and this here we've already identified that as the palatine bone, and this here is the vomer, and this bone, there's a lateral side. Oh, can you see? Let's see. There's a lateral side and the medial side to this, and this is called the pterygoid process. So this right here is the lateral pterygoid process, and this is the medial pterygoid process. I'm not sure what happened to my pointer, my pencil with the sharper tip, so you could better see what I'm pointing at. This is kind of hard to tell. I'm pointing here. This is the lateral, and this is the medial pterygoid process. Now, we are going to look at the inside of the skull and identify the various regions. And I think earlier in part 1, I identified this as the zygomatic process, but this is also the zygomatic arch. I don't think I've mentioned that. So there it is. Now we're going to turn this so that we are facing the posterior again, and I'm going to flip it so that we're looking at the inside of the skull. So I drew all over it too to make it somewhat clearer. This region here, this is the ethmoid bone, which is made up of several parts. At the center of the ethmoid bone, you'll see this sharp rooster head looking part. This feature here is called the cribriform, crista galli. This is the crista galli, and around the crista galli, this entire area is the cribriform plate. And these holes, there are little tiny holes all around the crista galli, and these holes are the olfactory foramina, where the olfactory nerves run through, in these tiny holes on the olfactory plate or the cribriform plate. Either or, they can be used interchangeably. They are saying the same thing. And down this region here, it looks like a butterfly. This piece of bone is called the sphenoid bone. Sphenoid. And there's a lesser wing and a greater wing. This part is the lesser wing because it's smaller than the one below. This is the greater wing. Lesser wing of the sphenoid and the lesser wing of the sphenoid and the greater wing of the sphenoid. Okay, so let's identify some of these holes, or the foramina. Over here, I put little red dots to show you that these are the optic foramina, or you could also call it the optic canals, where the optic nerves run through. And here is what is called the sella turcica, where the master gland, or the pituitary gland, sits. And it's protected right in this little indentation. It's like a little dip where the pituitary gland would sit. And we have various holes all along here and all along there. Some of the holes you can't really see, so I drew red marks to show you where they should be located. There's a hole here, but then I don't think this pierced all the way through when they made this skull. So to show you, here we mentioned that these are the optic canals, and this sharp edge that is part of the lesser wing of the sphenoid, that is called the anterior clinoid process. And just underneath it, there's a hole here. I don't know if you can see. That hole right there is the foramen rotundum. Foramen rotundum is that hole and that hole. Okay? They come in pairs. And this hole is, it's a lot bigger than it should be, but it's the foramen ovale. This is the foramen ovale. And there's one that should be here, but it didn't pierce through when they made it, so I drew it right there. So these two are the foramina ovale. And just posterior to the foramen ovale is the foramen spinosum. This is a foramen spinosum right here, and this is also a foramen spinosum. I made a mistake when I was drawing the line. It should be this right here. And over here there should be a large hole that's it's hard to see. It's pointing this way, so you can't see. Maybe if I could tilt it that way. See that big hole? That is the jugular foramen, where the jugular veins would run through. The jugular foramina are where the jugular veins run through. And again, this is the foramen magnum, and on the opposite side of the occipital condyles. Remember, these are the occipital condyles, right? And then I'm just flipping it over to look at the inside. There are two holes here. Okay, these holes are hypoglossal canals. Hypoglossal canals are right near the large hole, the foramen magnum. Okay, and remember earlier when we were looking at the side profile, I mentioned that there was an external auditory foramen, or also known as external acoustic, external acoustic meatus or external auditory meatus, and there's also an internal that leads to the inside of the skull. That is right here. That right here and that right there are the internal acoustic meatus. The internal acoustic meatus. Okay? Which is right by the jugular vein. So these are the jugular veins, and these are the internal acoustic meatus. And I think that's it. That's the occipital bone. We have the frontal bone. These are the parietal bones. Temporal will be down here. Temporal bone. So, just like that. Frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, ethmoid, sphenoid, and that is about it. Optic foramen, or optic canals, or optic foramina. Oh, we named the foramen rotundum, ovale, spinosum, but I haven't mentioned the lacerum. Foramen lacerum is right here, that red dot that I drew, right here, right by the sella turcica, the outer edge of the sella turcica. This outer edge is called the dorsum cellae. Dorsum cellae. And this outer edge is the posterior clinoid process. Posterior clinoid process. Since this is the anterior clinoid process. Anterior clinoid processes and posterior clinoid processes. And right next to the posterior clinoid process, you'll find the foramen lacerum. Okay? And that's still part of the anterior and posterior clinoid processes are part of the sella turcica where the master gland would be found. Okay, and that concludes the human skull anatomy. Hope that was helpful.